this show on the road. I will call the meeting to order at 2:32, and we will do introductions, welcome and introductions, I guess. I welcome everybody to this meeting and glad all of you could make it. It's a good day to sit inside with an air conditioner, at least where I'm at. So I'm Doug Kramer. I'm a farmer in the St. Paul area, and I'm chairman of the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Commission. Sarah?
Thanks, Doug. I'm Sarah Evans-Peters. I was appointed by the OWEB board to represent natural resources. My day job is with Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture, and I'm based in Buena Vista, Oregon, which is a dot on the map outside of Independence. And I don't know if I am co-chair or vice chair, but I'm one of those.
Technically vice chair, but as far as running the meeting, you're serving in a bit of a co-chair capacity.
All right, I will pass it to Jan.
Did you say Jan? Oh, sorry. There's so many Dans and Stans. I represent the water quality seed on the commission, and I live up in Sandy, and I work with the conservation districts around the state as the president of their board.
Doug, would you like me to call on people?
Yeah, why don't you do that? I don't have a good list, so I'll let you. Thank you.
Yep. Ed, go for it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ed Contreras, Commissioner representing Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm based in Klamath Falls, and happy to be here and see everyone.
Thanks, Ed. Amanda.
Good afternoon. I'm Amanda Lowe. I'm based out of Pendleton, Oregon, and I'm the OWEB appointed tribal representative on OAHC.
Thanks for being here. Mark.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Oh, yeah, Mark Labhart. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Mark Labhart. I have the privilege of sitting on the OWEB board and liaison from the board to OWEB, and I sit on the board as an ODF&W commissioner, and I live in Sisters, where it's really hot today.
Awesome. Nancy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nancy Duncrack. I'm the Department of Land Conservation and Development spot on the commission, and I work for the Coalition of Land Trusts from my home in Joseph, Oregon.
Thanks, Nancy. Dan.
Hey, everyone. I'm Dan Bigelow, representing Oregon State Extension and based here in Corvallis.
Thanks, Dan. Mark Vargas.
Okay, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. My video was working on the other program, but not this one. I'll get it to work by the end of the day. So thanks. Mark Vargas. I'm also representing the Fish and Wildlife side of things, appointed by or approved or recommended by ODFW also. So good to be here.
Good to have you here, Mark. And then Laura.
Hi, everyone. Laura Masterson, representing Ag. I am an organic vegetable farmer in the Willamette Valley. Yeah, looking forward to the conversation today.
Same. And then we have OWEB staff, so I can introduce myself. I'm Taylor Larson. I'm the coordinator for the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program here at OWEB. And I'll pass it to Robin.
Hi, everyone. Robin Meacher. I'm the Conservation Easement Specialist in the Oregon Ag Heritage Program.
Awesome. Renee.
Good afternoon, everyone. Renee Davis, Acquisitions and Special Programs Manager at OWEB.
Okay, and Ellen.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ellen Ingemels. I'm a grant support specialist with OWEB, and I'm here for note-taking and tech support, so message me if you need me.
Running the whole meeting. Thank you, Ellen. And then Ivy, if you're with us, you can introduce yourself too.
I am. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ivy Clark-Henry. I provide admin support to the Restoration Grant Program here at OWEB. I am just here to sit in and watch. I'm going to be helping you out in future meetings as the future Ellen. So thank you.
Thanks for being here, Ivy. Great. Well, back to you, Doug. That's everybody that I saw.
Okay, well, I think that does it for welcome and introduction. So, Sarah?
Thanks, Doug. That brings us to agenda item A, public comment. And from what I know, I don't think we received any public comment submissions. Taylor, is that correct?
That is correct. It's been practiced in the past that we have invited anybody who's attending, if they do have public comment, to raise their hand and they can have their 3 minutes. So if you're open to that, you could invite anybody who's in attendance to raise their hand.
Yes. Is there anybody in attendance that would like to have the floor for 3 minutes? If so, raise your hand. Okay.
Not seeing any hands raised.
Hearing none, I will pass it back to Doug.
Great.
Okay, that moves us to review and approval of the minutes of our last meeting. Everybody get a chance to review it, and if so, does anybody have questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion for approval.
I move that we approve the meeting minutes.
I'll take Jan for the motion. Who wants to second it?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of our last meeting, which was February 21st. Any further discussion? We'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Did anybody abstain? Okay, motion is passed. On to you, Sarah, for agenda item C.
All right, agenda item C. I think I'm going to pass this off to Taylor to present the applications received, and then we'll open it up for the commission deliberation and funding recommendations.
Perfect. Yeah. So what I was thinking about doing is just summarizing the staff report real quick and then running through kind of a high level summary of all the applications we received, the evaluations, or I guess the technical review team's evaluation and ranking. And then Sarah will help us facilitate a discussion about the commission getting to their funding recommendation for the board. So with that, I guess I'll just start by summarizing the staff report. So basically the staff report summarizes the 2025 Oregon Ag Heritage Program Conservation Management Plan grant solicitation, and then provides staff recommendations for the commission's consideration. So if you'll remember, quite a ways back, the Oregon Climate Action Commission allocated $750,000 from the Natural and Working Lands Fund to support OAHP grants for developing and implementing conservation management plans focused on carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emissions reductions. The commission also indicated that additional natural and working lands funds could be used, pulling from another allocation that OWEB got for its open solicitation program, if there were sufficient demand for the program. And so staff will be proposing an amendment to the OWEB board spending plan at the July 22nd, 23rd meeting to make $752,524,000 available for this grant cycle. So this grant, the CMP grant solicitation, was open from February to April 1st, 2025, and we received 8 applications requesting a total of $955,084. The applications were reviewed by the technical review team according to administrative rules that were adopted in 2024. I'm sure many of you remember participating in that process. The technical review team is composed of experts, and they evaluated and ranked the applications based on their alignment with that new evaluation criteria and the overall program intent of the Oregon Ag Heritage Program. The technical review team, they don't make funding recommendations, but provide a ranking to the commission, which then staff presents here today, along with a staff funding recommendation. So, and then kind of the big point of meeting today is that this commission in turn then develops its own funding recommendation for the OWEB board, sort of based on the technical review team's ranking and the staff evaluations and your reading of the applications, obviously. But kind of overall, the technical review team found that all projects were qualified as they met the basic program requirements, and higher ranked applications demonstrated a more clear link between proposed conservation actions and the long-term viability of the particular land in question for agriculture. And so staff are recommending that the commission recommend funding the OAHP Conservation Management Plan grants in ranked order up to the available funding line as shown in attachment B. And we can pull that up later for the commission's deliberation. So what I'm going to do now is give just kind of a high-level overview of each project and summarize the technical review team's evaluation and ranking. And then we can pause after each project summary to ask, and I can try and answer any clarifying questions about the project. But I encourage you to write down your thoughts and ideas as we go and hold those for discussion of all the projects at the end of the summary presentation. So unless anybody has questions as to our approach, I think what I'll do is I kind of have a map that shows each of the projects on it. So I'll share my screen and we'll kind of use that as our visual guide as I run through the projects. So let's see if I can share here.
Hey, Taylor and Doug, if you don't mind, I'm going to go back out and then come right back in. But go ahead, Doug. Taylor, don't let me stop.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Yeah.
All right. Is everybody seeing a Google Earth map? Great.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to run through the projects in alphabetical order. First up is Branch Road Farm. So we'll zoom in here. So this is application number 226-7201-24326. The applicant is the Coast Fork Willamette Watershed Council, and they're requesting $49,519 and a total project cost of $54,322. And what they want to do is update and then begin implementation of a conservation management plan on a 73-acre diversified farm and ranch near Cottage Grove to address water quality, quantity, and soil health, as well as support on-farm habitat management through forest thinning, prescribed fire, seeding, and prescribed grazing. So overall, the technical review team found that the application presented a strong continuation of existing conservation efforts, given that this is an application based on a project that we funded in our previous initial conservation management plan cycle. And the application proposes to leverage viable soils, water access, and diverse agricultural practices. And the strengths included a clear articulation of past projects, a proposed expansion of grazing for understory management, and the potential for community engagement through a school and education programs that take place at the property. The project is well positioned to address high priority water quality concerns and benefits from experienced staff at both the proposed plant holder organization as well as at the farm itself. However, the review team did have some concerns regarding the clarity in the application of agricultural uses on the property versus forestry land uses, the current activity level of the farm business itself, and the lack of explicit engagement, at least as described in the application, with communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. Ultimately, this project ranked number 6 of 8, which, as you'll see, puts it just below the available funding line, but we'll get there. So any clarifying questions on Branch Road Farm before we move to the next project? Okay, and Sarah, you'll have to help me because I can't see all the hands, but I'll move on to our next project, which is, I have them out of order alphabetically, but is Cresswell Oaks. Okay, so Cresswell Oaks. So this is application number 226-7202-24328. And again, the applicant is the Coast Fork Willamette Watershed Council. They're requesting $200,000, and the total project cost is $210,590. And what they want to do is draft and begin implementation of a conservation management plan on an 1,800-acre ranch near Cresswell, which is currently enrolled in a conservation easement to enhance oak habitat. They want to use the conservation management plan to enhance oak habitat and fire resiliency through the use of prescribed grazing and the mechanical removal of understory brush. The review team thought that the proposal does demonstrate a high likelihood of success due to the applicants and the agricultural operators' robust organizational capacity, successful history of leveraging existing conservation plans and funding, and valuable partnerships with tribes. The project effectively addresses critical environmental issues like water quality and climate change mitigation, while fostering community engagement. The review team did have concerns regarding the lack of detailed information for the proposed prescribed grazing, the absence of a clear riparian fencing plan, and insufficient clarification on how this project connects to an existing conservation easement that exists on the property. Ultimately, the review team ranked this project number 3 of 8. So, clarifying questions on Cresswell Oaks? Okay, we'll move to Deck Family Farm then. Okay, so this is application number 226-7204-24335. The applicant is the Long Tom Watershed Council, and they're requesting $98,983 for a total project cost of $108,533. And again, what they want to do is draft and begin implementation of a conservation management plan on a 321-acre ranch near Junction City to enhance water quality and quantity, as well as enhancing riparian and oak habitats on the farm through the use of prescribed grazing, wetland creation, and various plant establishment strategies. The review team felt the application presents a compelling case for funding due to the farm's strong economic viability and diversification, its multi-generational commitment to conservation over a proposed 50-year conservation management plan, and its location within a high-priority watershed for addressing critical environmental concerns like water temperature, bacteria, and nutrients. The farm's established and effective educational and internship programs further underscore the broader community benefits, while its existing proactive conservation practices and acknowledgement of climate impacts demonstrate a deep understanding of sustainable agriculture. However, that review team did think the application could be strengthened by providing more detailed information on proposed nutrient management practices to justify the allocated budget to that particular strategy. And ultimately, the review team ranked this project number 1 of 8. Questions? Okay, we'll hop over the mountains here to Garden Creek Ranch. So this is application number 226-7205-24328. 342. Yes, okay. And the applicant is Deschutes Land Trust. But just to note that the Conservation Management Plan holder would ultimately be the Crooked River Watershed Council. So they're requesting $134,428, and the total project cost is $142,528. And they want to draft and begin implementation of a conservation management plan on a 640-acre ranch somewhat near Prineville to improve water quality, maintain soil health, improve on-farm wildlife habitat, and reduce the potential for catastrophic wildfire through the use of forest thinning, prescribed fire, riparian forest buffer establishment, and pasture planting. Also note that in the application, Deschutes Land Trust indicated they're in the process of pursuing a conservation easement on the property as well. The review team felt that the application presents a forward-thinking approach to land management that strongly emphasizes soil health, native plant restoration, and carbon sequestration through innovative practices like rotational grazing and the use of e-collars for wildlife-friendly livestock control. The project's location within a crucial habitat zone and adjacency to public lands, coupled with Deschutes Land Trust's pursuit of a conservation easement and a history of tribal engagement, highlights significant ecological and partnership strengths. The review team did say that the application raises some concerns regarding the limited apparent scalability of the agricultural component of the property, and the lack of clarity on forested grazing management. Additionally, the project's low priority for water quality and potential unsuitability of prescribed burning for this habitat type may impact its broader appeal and effectiveness. The review team also indicated that more detail on generational succession would have strengthened the application. And ultimately, the review team ranked this project number 4 of 8 in a tie for 4th. So there's 2 projects tied for 4th. Clarifying questions?
I got one, and it's not specific to this one, but there's an OWEB request, and then there's a total cost on most, if not all, these projects. I was wondering that difference in value, what is that something the landowner is going to contribute, and does that play a part in how these get ranked?
So it's their match that they're bringing to the project, and so every project budget details where they're bringing their match from. There is an evaluation criteria that I'm not going to quote exactly correctly, but the extent to which the benefit to the state may be maximized based on, and then there is a component of the amount of match that they're bringing that impacts that evaluation criteria. So we have a 5% match requirement for the program. And obviously all projects met that requirement in different ways. And some projects did bring in a higher amount of match. And really the only time you'll see that mentioned in the evaluation is when it's sort of above the minimum as a strength. So we can dive into the specific budget for these projects. I'd be happy to pull that up if it's helpful, Doug. But maybe
no, that answers my question, and thank you.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next project. So let's go to Henderson Flats. Okay, so this is application number 226-7207-24352. The applicant is the Jefferson Soil and Water Conservation District, and they're requesting $133,727 and a total project cost of $167,877. And Like most of these projects, they want to draft and begin implementation of a conservation management plan. Here it's across 932 acres and 3 contiguous farm properties that are separately owned but managed by a single operator near Terrebonne. The goal of the conservation management plan is to integrate efforts to maintain soil health, improve irrigation efficiency, and improve on-farm wildlife habitat through the implementation of reduced tillage, various planting practices, and prescribed grazing and fire. The review team felt that the application presents an opportunity to conserve and enhance working agricultural lands adjacent to significant public resources like Smith Rock State Park and the Crooked River National Grasslands, which directly contributes to wildlife connectivity. And the application offers substantial soil health improvements and water quality benefits for the Crooked Creek and the community of Warm Springs drinking water. The project's high match percentage and strong partnerships underscore its organizational capacity and broad support, while its role in wildfire risk mitigation highlights a crucial community benefit. The application's reliance on external North Unit Irrigation District piping infrastructure does create some uncertainty, and the unsecured long-term lease and fragmented landowner arrangement could potentially undermine sustained implementation. So and I guess, and the review team also felt that there was a lack of detail about juniper removal considerations, which left some key ecological questions in their minds unanswered. Ultimately, the review team ranked this project, again, 4 of 8, tied with Garden Creek. Clarifying questions.
I had a question. Sorry, this is Nancy.
Yep.
Like Doug's, which is doesn't pertain to this project, but you mentioned that one, Crestwell Oaks has a conservation easement on the property, and Garden Creek Ranch, there's a potential for that happening. And I just wondered how that weighed, or if it weighed at all, in the evaluation of the project.
Yeah, so it did come up in the technical review team discussion on both properties. In the context of Garden Creek, I think it helped paint the picture of the commitment of the applicant to working on this property in the long term. And so that was, I think they saw that as a strength in, as far as like securing the investment. You know, that one is uncertain, and so I don't think it carried a ton of weight, but they did mention it in the application. The TRT thought it was a strength. At Crestwell Oaks, they have an existing conservation easement, and again, I think overall the technical review team saw that as a strength, again, because the investments made on the property are more likely to be sustained with the existence of a conservation easement. There is and was some question around the interaction between the implementation of a conservation management plan and the existing requirements in the easement that's already on the property. And so we can talk about this a little bit later when we get into our funding recommendation, but staff are likely going to require, as a if the project were to be funded at Crestwell Oaks, a copy of that easement prior to signing the grant agreement as a condition of the grant agreement, so that we can understand the interplay between the two. Does that answer your question, Nancy?
Yes, thank you very much, Taylor.
Yep. Okay, let's go to Horseshoe Bar. Maybe not. I'll have to fly there myself. Here we go. Okay. All right, so Horseshoe Bar. So this is application number 226-7203-24331. The applicant is Sustainable Northwest, and they're requesting $185,386, and the total project cost is $206,355. What they want to do is draft and begin implementation of a conservation management plan across 34,542 acres, again, somewhat near the town of Antelope along the John Day River. The goal of the conservation management plan is to improve rangeland health through the implementation of prescribed grazing, range planting, and prescribed burning. The technical review team felt that the application presents a strong case for conservation due to the large scale of the property and its extensive river frontage, which offers significant regional ecological benefits. The ranch's agricultural viability, reinforced by covenants and easements ensuring its long-term agricultural use, firmly positions it as a vital working landscape. The plans focus on juniper removal, soil health, prescribed grazing for carbon sequestration, and addressing water quality in the high priority area watershed demonstrates a technically sound and impactful approach. Furthermore, robust partnerships with the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs and NRCS, coupled with the ranch's compatible multi-use nature, highlights its strong collaborative foundation and economic resilience. And ultimately, the review team ranked this project number 2 of 8. Clarifying questions. Okay, we'll hop back over the mountains then. Cascades. To Rio Robles. So this is application number 226-7206-24347. The applicant is the South Santiam Watershed Council, and they're requesting $30,416 and a total project cost of $76,102. What they want to do is just draft a conservation management plan for 100 acres on a farm near Albany to improve soil health, water quality, and on-farm habitat through the implementation of conservation practices such as no-till and cover cropping, riparian forest buffer, and upland habitat management. Review team felt that the application presents a vision for ecological enhancements, demonstrating a strong understanding of habitat needs and climate threats through its focus on savanna development, riparian enhancement, and explicit conservation practices like cover cropping. Its strategic location in a high priority water quality watershed and adjacency to a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conservation easement underscores its potential for significant ecological impacts and connectivity. And this is further bolstered by an articulated multi-generational commitment. The review team did have some concerns that arose from the project's limited agricultural economic viability as a standalone operation. So due to its small acreage and lack of access to irrigation, making the economic and ecological interaction unclear. So the review team felt like the application's singular focus on plan development without immediate implementation impacts its near-term, or would negatively impact its near-term impacts, and a clearer articulation of how the proposed ecological uplift directly supports the long-term farm economic viability would have strengthened the application's overall competitiveness. And ultimately, the review team ranked this project 7 of 8. Clarifying questions? We're almost through them. All right, and we'll go down to Soda Spring. Okay, Soda Springs. So this is application number 226-7200-24325. And the applicant is Rogue Regenerative. and they're requesting $122,625 for a total project cost of $128,785. And then what they want to do is draft and begin implementation of a conservation management plan on a 172-acre farm near Ashland with the goal of improving soil health, water quality, pasture productivity, and reducing the negative impacts of drought, wildfire, and heavy rainfall through the use of conservation practices such as pasture planting, prescribed grazing, riparian forest buffers, and prescribed burning. The technical review team felt that while the project aims to address critical water quality issues for bacteria and temperature in a priority watershed and incorporates standard NRCS practices and mentions prescribed burning for fuel management, they did have some significant concerns that overshadowed these strengths. So reviewers expressed questions about the applicant's capacity, given their limited track record on projects and a lack of a public presence. They also felt like the proposed plan was somewhat overly ambitious with many layered practices on top of each other, and it was raising doubts for the technical review team about the feasibility and cost effectiveness of the investment. They also mentioned that the property or that the application lacked a baseline description of the habitats and wildlife considerations on the property, including notable omissions of any discussion of oak habitat. And ultimately, they ranked this project 8 of 8. Any clarifying questions on Soda Spring?
Taylor, Mark Vargas.
Yeah.
Was this in a conservation easement or not? You know?
This is not.
Okay, I didn't think so. Thanks.
Yeah. But it is, yeah, there's some interesting owner, like one of the, and this is in the evaluation, but one of the property owners is also on the board of the applicant organization. And so the review team did have some concerns about that as well. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing so that we can all see each other's faces. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to facilitate a discussion around what the commission wants to do as far as a funding recommendation to the board. Oh, would it be helpful? Sorry, Sarah, would it be helpful for me to pull up the staff funding recommendation in attachment B so we could all take a look at that? Okay, let me do that real quick. Let me share again. Let's go down here. Avert your eyes. Well, scroll. Okay, here we are.
Not sharing yet, Taylor.
Oh, great. Well, you missed all my scrolling then.
There you
How
go.
about now? Can you see it?
We can
Okay.
see. Great. Thank you, Taylor. And I think we can open it up for discussion, deliberations. Ed.
Yeah, I had I guess a question. In your summary, Taylor, you mentioned that the DEC family farm CMP had a duration of 50 years, and I don't recall seeing a duration of the proposed implementation of the plan for the other projects in my review, and you didn't mention it in the summary. I guess it makes sense to me that application is in the lead because there is a 10-year longevity to this investment. But I don't know if you had any any information on the duration of the plan of any of the other applications of that plan.
Yeah, I mean, so in order to be eligible for implementation, the conservation management plan per rule needs to have a lifespan of 20 to 50 years. Most applicants chose to go with the 20-year time period. And I think that makes a lot of sense for a lot of folks. It's still a pretty long commitment. The deck application was the only one that chose sort of the upper end of the allowable time, and I think it did. The review team did look kindly on that. That being said, the grants that we're making are not for that long of a period. So we're funding them to do, a 50-year plan with that sort of like planning horizon, but then we're really only paying for the plan development and, an initial 3 or 4 years of implementation.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks. So I've been kind of comparing right around the cut line Branch Road against Garden Creek and Henderson Flats. And I guess I kind of I don't really understand some of the critiques of Branch Road that were in the review report there, where they seem to be concerned about a focus on forestry practices and the lack of engagement with communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. But if you look on their website, they run a farm school and they clearly are selling agricultural outputs. There's meat and fresh produce listed right on the website. And compared to Garden Creek and Henderson Flats, it's actually both in a high priority water quality watershed, which the other two are not, and it has an easement, which I don't believe the other two, or I know Garden Creek at least doesn't. So I have a hard time with some of the critiques of it, and how fair they really are. I don't know if anyone else had similar thoughts.
Taylor, I got a question for you on that. Because of the nature of our commission, are we, I don't know if the right term is allowed, but are we allowed to fund forestry practices through these conservation management plans?
It's a little bit of a gray area, but I mean, ultimately, as long as there is an agricultural component to the operation, associated forestry practices that support the agricultural operation are allowed. And we have in our suite of eligible practices that we can pay for the implementation of, we do have a number of practices, including thinning, that are eligible for implementation. A lot of times that would be paired with thinning and then potentially using grazing as a management tool, I think was the idea of including that practice. But yeah, so long as the long-winded answer is, so long as there's an agricultural component to the happening on the property, any associated forestry is allowable. And that's sort of the gray area for the commission to wrestle with is, how much is this investment supporting the long-term agricultural viability of the property?
Okay. And then the other thing I would caution all of us, and Dan mentioned it, but he went to the website of Branch Road Farms. I think as a commission, we are supposed to take our information from the application, and we need to be careful about basing our decisions on something that was not in the application when we do this. But you could clarify that maybe for us, Taylor, if
Yeah,
if I'm out of line there.
We do ask to the extent possible that you root your discussion in what's in the application, what's in the evaluation, and what you bring to the table as, experts. That's part of the reason you're on the commission, is for, what you know and can bring to the discussion. So we do ask that you don't dig too deep down any rabbit holes that on the internet or hearsay. But that being said, I mean, it's a little bit of a gray zone, but we do try and keep your comments focused to what's in the application.
Yeah, I apologize for that.
Oh no, it's a fair point.
The farm school is explicitly listed at several points in the application, but if I could just maybe ask for some clarification on the meaning of this engagement with communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. Like what does that actually mean? Does that mean the farm itself is not disproportionately impacted by climate change, or there's some type of outreach requirement?
Yeah, so it's related to OWEB, the agency, this past year, sort of while we were going through our rulemaking process, right before that, they adopted 3 additional climate criteria that apply to all grant programs under the agency, and the impacts on communities disproportionately impacted by climate change is one of those additional criteria. And so then we have a question in the application kind of getting at that. And so the technical review team felt like this project was perhaps less strong than others in their response to that question.
Okay. I mean, again, I don't know if this is like too much reading between the lines, but the fact that it's in a high priority watershed and, clearly has like a component of the operation that works with local people in the community through this farm school. I guess you can put me on the record as disagreeing with that critique.
Yeah, and that's why you're here. We welcome that disagreement.
If I could explain a little bit farther Dan's question about the definition of communities disproportionately affected by climate change, that statement and term is based on an EPA report on social vulnerability to different communities. So I would welcome you to view that report because it analyzes impacts of climate change across different communities globally.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Mark, I know you're waiting, but I have a feeling Renee has something to say about this. Is that all right?
Thank you, Sarah, for being a mind reader. So the other piece, Dan, that I would just underscore is going back to what Taylor mentioned at the beginning about the funding source. So this is pass-through funding as part of the Natural and Working Lands investment via the Oregon Climate Action Commission. So there are, and I'm looking, we have 11 evaluation criteria for the Conservation Management Plan investments under OAHP, and certainly I think the interest of the Climate Action Commission and some of the extensive outreach that Taylor and Alexa did for the Natural and Working Land investments really put a particular emphasis on the climate connections and the connection to that disproportionately impacted by climate change evaluation criterion. So that I think was popping maybe differently for the review team because of the funding source supporting these grants than what it would be potentially if it was simply a standard legislative investment in OAHP writ large. So I just wanted to flag that piece. The connection to the fund source certainly was on the mind of reviewers in this case also.
Thank you.
Mark.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So first of all, I'd like to say how much I appreciate the effort that the review team put into, pardon me, strengths and weaknesses based on the 11 criteria of really good work there. And getting it down to the funding line, that's always the hard part, is where do we break the line? So it's very difficult for that. But my question has to do with, since I'm fairly new to this process on these management plans, has there been any discussion among staff and the applicants about the cost per acre for these projects? And I'll give you an example. I just took the top five. One is a $200,000 project for 2,000 acres, so that's $100 an acre for development of the management plan. One is about $99,000 for 321 acres, and that's $308 per acre for the management plan. One's 133,932 acres for $143, and then one's 134,000 for 642.10. So if you put that all together, it looks like we got a low of 100. But one of them's $185,000 for the 34,000 acre. That's $6 an acre. But if you take that one out, we've got a low of 100 to a high of 300 an acre. So is there any criteria that staff uses about this is roughly what we've done? When a person says, well, I need $200,000 to do this management plan, about, where are they coming up with those figures, how they're coming up with those figures, because we seem to be all over the place about all five of these are all over the place in terms of if you did the acres. And I realize the more acres, you can develop a management plan for less money if you have more acres. But so I'm not, it's not a concern, so don't read anything into that. I just wonder if somebody could clarify for me. The applicants are asking for a certain amount of money, and they're asking for, in most cases, 95% of the project to be funded by the OHAP program. And so kind of wondering how the financial side of this is calculated. So can somebody help me there?
I can attempt to, Mark. So folks' budgets are kind of broken out into two separate chunks. So there's the costs to develop the plan, and then there's the cost to implement the plan. And so folks' cost to develop the plan, I mean, that's really just people's time. So that's, the applicant's time, who's usually, but not always, the plan holder. It's the producer's time, which sometimes is donated, sometimes is not, and any third-party consultants that are there to kind of develop the plan. And once they have that plan developed, it needs to be approved by OWEB before we can make payments to implement the plan. And we've sort of worked over the past several years to develop a methodology for how we go about paying for the implementation of these plans. And basically what we're doing is we have a payment for ecosystem service model based on a suite of conservation practices modeled off of NRCS conservation practices that we've calculated the expected ecosystem service benefits based on their water quality impacts, their fish and wildlife habitat impacts, and their carbon sequestration impacts. And so depending on which practices they're proposing to implement as a part of their conservation management plan, the price that we pay for the implementation of practices differs quite a bit. So for instance, an acre of riparian forest buffer, I think we value it, and again, I'm just pulling this off of my memory, so it may or may not be 100% accurate, at $505 per acre. Whereas another conservation practice that is eligible is cover cropping. Again, it's valuable, but the expected benefit based on our methodology is $5 per acre. So if you're implementing, cover cropping across your 100-acre farm, your implementation funding is only going to be, $500. Whereas, I mean, obviously we wouldn't necessarily want to put an entire 100-acre farm into riparian forest, but if there was a 100-acre riparian forest component of an application, that would be, $500,000 or $50,000. Sorry, math. So does that, and then there's a whole spread between there of conservation practices and their expected value. And so it's a little tricky because what we're asking folks to do in these applications is, right, tell us what you're going to do before you have the plan saying what you're going to do. So there is a little bit of guesswork going on. And part of the reason we're doing that is because of the fund source. There was an expectation that we pay for technical assistance and on the ground implementation of climate smart practices. And so we kind of bunched what I think is probably naturally two separate solicitation tracks: a solicitation to develop a plan and then a solicitation to implement that plan that has been developed into a single solicitation where we're asking folks to tell us about your plan to make a plan, and then how much money you're going to need to implement that plan you haven't made yet. But people are basing those expectations of cost on our published criteria around value for certain conservation practices.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I didn't know we had those published numbers, so that helps. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, we can follow up about that too, Mark. You're new, and I probably should have had that as part of your orientation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Taylor, we spent about 4 years coming up with all that, and I feel bad for these newest members on our commission because they haven't been involved in that long process of coming up with this. But yes, we really have thought that through quite at length and had some long discussions about how that all works. So it's a really good point to bring up. And yeah, we've thought about it, and you're right, Taylor, that's probably something we should make sure these new members get informed of.
Yeah, and I think if we do another cycle, it'd probably be nice for the whole commission to get a recap of our methodology and approach.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Jan.
Yes, I was wondering, Taylor, if it might be helpful on future applications if we had some idea of what the potential valuation benefit would be based on those principles, even if it's like a ballpark.
Let's see if I'm just not quite sure I fully understand the question or the suggestion. Maybe rephrase
I was listening to you talk about and had listened to some other meetings where those valuations were discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if there is a potential for the applicants to suggest to the reviewers what kind of return there would be based on those particular practices. And that information might come back in some ballpark figure to us as we're reviewing these.
Yeah, okay. I think that makes sense. And you'll notice, some folks in their budgets, in their applications did list out kind of by expected conservation practice, how many acres, what they expected to do where, and then that sort of fed into their total request, and other folks kind of lumped their whole request together. So I think we could probably be more explicit to get uniform presentation of that data, so we're comparing apples to apples. And again, I think a little bit of the trick here is that we're asking folks to tell us what they're going to do before they have the plan gone through the planning process. But yeah, point taken, Jan. Thank you.
Right. So it would just be an estimate, but it would be a valuable tool.
Yes, Sarah, can I ask a quick follow-up of Jan? So Jan, I want to be clear. Would it be helpful to see that breakdown from the budget perspective to understand different ecosystem services and that kind of investment game plan across those, or are you talking about the estimated potential benefit of like amount of carbon sequestered? I want to make sure we're structuring follow up in the right way. Yep. Thank you.
The potential benefit would be the reason for my consideration anyway.
Thank you for clarifying, Renee. Hey, John, I think you joined late. Did you get a chance? I don't think you got a chance to introduce yourself, did you?
No, I didn't. I got double booked with the sage grouse plan, and I have a lot of faith in you folks carrying on this work, but I'm the only rancher watching the sage grouse planting, so I stepped into that one instead. But yeah, John O'Keefe, rancher, Lake County.
Thanks for coming, John. Anybody else?
Are you ready for a motion, Sarah?
I am ready to entertain a motion, Doug.
I will move that we approve the staff recommendation for funding the top 5 applicants for our conservation management plan grant applications. And they would be the Deck Family Farm, the Horse Bar Conservation Management Plan, the Cresswell Oaks Conservation Management Plan, the Garden Creek Ranch CMP, and Henderson Flats Management Plan.
Thank you, Doug. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, John. Any discussion?
I'll just say, Sarah, I was supposed to ping you ahead of time. It'd be nice to do a roll call vote on this particular one per public meeting rule.
Okay. That person by person, that is not just all in favor, say aye.
Yeah, make your job a little harder.
Okay, we're gonna do a roll call vote. I am like Bruce Taylor, and my Robert's rules are not that great. All right, so I will go through and call each person, right, Taylor? And you will say aye or nay or abstain. Ed.
Aye.
Amanda.
Aye.
Jan Lee.
Aye.
Doug Kramer.
Aye.
Mark Labhart.
I think I'm non-voting, aren't I?
Hey, I don't know.
Yep. Good catch.
Yeah.
Laura. We'll come back to Laura. Dan.
Nay.
Nay. Nancy.
Aye.
Mark Vargas.
Aye.
And John.
Aye.
And I am an aye. All right. Motion to move forward the top 5 applications.
Laura,
I'd like to vote aye.
Oh, you're back, Laura. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Motion to move forward the top 5 applications for funding consideration to the OWEB board is approved. And I will pass it back to Doug.
Okay, we're ahead of schedule. Imagine that. So we're on program updates, and Taylor is going to walk us through that.
Yep, and I'm basically going to turn it over to Renee and Robin. So what we're going to do is Renee is going to give kind of a quick legislative update on all the moving pieces that potentially impact the future funding of the program. And then Robin's going to walk us through some potential updates to the conservation easement program and how we would run a a future solicitation if we were to get additional funding into the program, and facilitate a discussion amongst the commission to inform how we go about incorporating those updates. But before I stick my foot in my mouth, I think I'll just turn it over to Renee.
Thanks, Taylor. Good afternoon again, folks. So I want to give the current situation in terms of what we know about legislative and budgeting processes, and recognizing that the legislature is still in session. So this is the update as of June 10th. So just relative to the content in the staff report, there is mention of House Bill 3131 in the staff report. So that bill is still sitting in the Ways and Means Committee. We'll continue to watch any potential movement on that, either on the bill itself or any discussions that could start to emerge in around end of session bill, sometimes known as Christmas tree bill, but renamed as end of session bill. In recent years, just as we get closer to the end of legislative session. So continuing to watch House Bill 3131, but no movement as of yet. So the other piece that the staff report mentions is the some of the specific content that was included in the governor's recommendation for OWEB's budget. Now, though, we have moved into legislative budgeting, but just to give an update on where some of those pieces stand. So our budget bills had, our OWEB budget bills had a work session on the 2nd of June, and ultimately passed out of that committee. So the content in those budget bills that's relevant to OHP, two pieces of that. First is Package 105, which provides a one-time expenditure limitation and position authority. So wonky state budgeting terms, basically saying that OWEB has existing funding that it can allocate for, and it has approval for 12 months of 2 positions for OAHP staffing. So that is based on ending balance that we have currently with the program. So that piece was recommended by Legislative Fiscal Office and ultimately approved. So 1-year funding for 2 positions based on existing available funding. The other piece is Package 801, which are Legislative Fiscal Office analyst adjustments that proposes to include modest investments in OAHP grants and staffing. So how that is structurally comprised is a one-time allocation of $2 million would come into the Oregon Ag Heritage Fund. From that $2 million, 12% of that, which equates to $240,000, would be available for staffing. The remaining 1.76 million would be available for OHP grants. So again, one-time investment is being proposed that would result in $1.76 million in grants, $240,000 in staffing. That does not make the staffing side of the situation whole for year 2 of the biennium. So that said, we're pleased to see that investment, and there would still be a gap. So I want to say this on the record because some information had been shared last week that suggested permanent investments, including permanent allocation of staffing. That is not the case. These are one-time allocations and still limited duration on the staff side, and a one-time allocation of grant funding. So we appreciate the fact that Colt sent out an update to folks clarifying the situation. We still have gotten some questions. So I'm letting you all know that because we're pleased to see an investment, and that is a lower investment than what was contemplated in House Bill 3131, which proposed $7.3 million for grants and staffing for the program. So we did have our budget pass out of full Ways and Means last Friday on the 6th, which is excellent. So now we're just awaiting movement to floor votes for the budget bills, and recognizing that we still have the potential for an end of session bill to ultimately introduce some new resources. We simply don't know if that is the case. So in terms of the time frame for that, target sine die, so target end of session is the 18th of June, and constitutionally, session can run all the way till the 29th of June. So without a doubt, there is a lot of movement in the Capitol right now, longer floor sessions, discussion of a transportation package, and I'm sure early discussions about end of session bills. So we will keep the commission updated as we know more. But as of right now, we would have about 1.6 million in grants to work with and staffing for 2 positions, but not for the full biennium. So I'm happy to answer questions, and recognizing that agencies support governor's budget and we can speak to budget bills that have passed. We cannot advocate for other bills that may be out there. So my responses may feel a little unsatisfactory, but I'm happy to answer the questions that I can. Okay, that's the easiest budget update I think I've ever given to a board or commission. So we'll keep you all posted. We're watching things really closely, and leadership are well engaged. Okay, I think with that, I'll turn it over to Robin to start talking about the program updates.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. So I will walk the commission through the 3 program update categories that we provided in the staff report, kind of go in order of the most kind of heady to the more tangible, I think. So I will walk through the 3 of them and then turn it over to you all for discussion so you can kind of focus on where the most where you have the most interest and see the most space for a conversation. And then there's prompts in the staff report for facilitation on this as well, but think the best approach is to kind of lay everything out there that we've been working on and some of the questions that we internally as staff have been working through, and how we've brought those questions and considerations kind of through our processes to our applicants, our grantees, and our reviewers, and now getting it in front of you all as the commission. So I'll start with the concept of the scoring rubric. So this is a space that has been brought to staff at OWEB in multiple capacities, both in kind of not a request specifically for the rubric, but more of a consideration of how would it look if the program were to weight the criteria that are used to evaluate conservation easement applications. And that has come kind of as a question from our applicants and our technical review teams, and we heard some, though not as directly, in the commission's conversation in the last award cycle in November, just some hope for additional clarification and some thread in the communication between the technical review team's discussion, why they may have seen a project a certain way, where it excelled, where it didn't, and see that more expressed more clearly in the evaluations and what the materials are that are brought to the commission when it's time for an award recommendation to go to the OWEB board. And so in that process, the concept of, a scoring rubric has come up multiple times. And this is essentially the attachment that was provided with the staff report, laid out a very high level example of what that could look like based on the evaluation criteria we have. If you all are familiar, we have a lot of criteria for this grant type. I think if you break it down, it's 26. And so coming up with a way to assign points to that and to come up with appropriate definitions of what those point and score ranges would look like was not something that we were doing at this time. It was more just laying out how that would look. The space for coming up with those weights and scoring ranges is really more of a conversation to have with the commission, and then take forward if it's something you all would like us to continue to explore and look at doing. So with that, I'm not going to go into the scoring rubric example itself yet, but we do want to point out that in our development of this, we came to some important points on our own, which is essentially that this would be a weighting of criteria. And we've had multiple conversations with the commission about how that can, one, provide clarity, but also gives a little bit, takes away some of the decision space that I think folks have expressed enjoying seeing in applications, where it gives the applicant the ability to make the best case for their project. And then also that what we've seen in our exposure to other programs that use scoring criteria is that sometimes you still get that same space where you have projects that tie in points, or you have a project that is 0.25 points away from another, and still they get ranked one ahead of the other. And so while it may provide the space for folks to see a quantitative reason for a ranking, it really doesn't solve the problem of having two projects that are very, very close to each other end up one being funded over another. And that is one of the spaces that I think we will consistently be seeing, no matter how we look at our evaluations and our rankings, is that we continue to operate in a funding constrained environment. And that is just going to continue to be the case for us. Currently is the case for us, and will always have some level of complication when it comes to how we end up doing rankings and funding lines. And then also wanting to bring OAHP into the context of OWEB as a whole. So this would be a unique process for ranking and evaluating that is more ingrained into a program than what we see in other programs. Scoring has been used at various times by various programs, and it's not really been something that's necessarily been continued for various reasons, but currently this would be a process that would be somewhat outside of the typical OWEB grant and TRT evaluation processes. And I'll go a little bit more into that as we talk through the technical review process, just based off of where we're at in terms of putting together technical review teams and some of the agency work we've been doing to try and make that somewhat more streamlined and also easier on our partners that provide that resource for us. So I'll move on from the rubric, knowing that this is a space we're going to come back to, and move us a little bit more into the conversations we've been having about the technical review process, because these are really very closely tied to each other. Our technical review teams are our experts that look at our applications that ultimately provide that ranking, to provide the commission with its space to make the recommendation to the board. And our review team is volunteers with subject matter expertise throughout the state. And we are in I won't say necessarily unique from an acquisition program perspective, because our Measure 76 program also is a statewide program, but in OHP, where we have such variable geographies, variable operations, variable landscapes, it's really important that we have a broad representation of expertise and subject matter on our TRTs, our technical review teams. And so we've tried to approach that multiple ways, given the constraints we have. We've done it two ways. Many of you have seen it go both of those. One where we tried kind of the core team with more regional input. And then we had the second round where we had just one core team that reviewed each application, and then had a technical review team where they all kind of talked through the projects together. And we found challenges with both in terms of how our review teams felt about comparing projects to each other, how our applicants felt their projects were compared to each other, and ultimately how you all felt understanding the rankings. So it's a space for continued exploration, and we provided both our applicants and our reviewers with surveys asking them about the process as well. And granted, we got very variable answers across the board on that, which was actually more surprising than I expected, particularly in the context of when it comes to having a core team and site visits. How do you make sure that you have parity of review if you have some applicants being looked at by different reviewers, and how that can be translated into a process that really shows fairness across that. So we did provide an attachment as well, attachment B, that basically just listed out the representation of expertise that we had in our last cycle. And we did when we were building the review committee last time, get a sense of what the applications were coming in the door, so that we could try and start those conversations and get people on the board that had that not just subject matter, but also regional difference. And so while we did, I think in attachment B, we focused on subject matter, I think what's missing from that we could have provided was also regional context, because some of that was pretty dispersed across the state, and which I think is a valuable aspect to have as well. But still something that we'll continue to work on. And I think we'll have to continue to do it in a space of somewhat, given the volunteer nature of our technical committees, and the time excuse me, commitment of those volunteers, it's continued. And then also the context of OWEB as a whole. We operate in the realm of technical review committees for almost every single one of our grant programs. And so currently we have, I think it's 33 review teams that operate within the organization. And many of the participants on those review teams are kind enough to be on multiple. And with some constraints given the federal environments right now, we are putting even more stress onto our state partners as well. So something that we're considering. And then given that the technical review committees are here to help you as the commission understand the ranking and the evaluations and the projects, we want to hear from you all kind of how we can best provide that line of sight in that ranking and that conversation into the evaluations. And then if there's space for us to build those committees in a way that is more, not more, but ensures that the type of expertise that you all want to see is there. So on that, I'll move up to application updates, because this is kind of the easiest.
Hey, Robin.
And yeah.
Oh, just really quickly, Amanda had her hand up. I want to check and see if it's a clarifying question.
Not clarifying. I can wait until Robin's done.
Thank you. You gave me an opportunity to take a sip of water. So the application updates is kind of our easiest spot, because we still are a new program. We're not ingrained in the way our application functions yet. And our grantees and applicants have been incredibly patient and gracious with us as we continue to adjust the application to try and get to a space that we are collecting the information that we absolutely need at OWEB to make informed and responsible grant making decisions, and to get our technical review committee in the information they need as well. So we have, again, had some conversations with our applicants and grantees on, sorry, my hay fever is getting to me, on what that balance looks like. And so we did have a really great working, I'll call it a working group, but I think it was less formal than that, multiple hour conversation with folks about how we can do that. And so we've gotten some really good feedback, and we'll be working definitely on how we can add this into streamlining efforts at the agency to reduce the volume of information asked, but still get to those important, sorry, excuse me, those important areas in the application. So all that being said, we are going to have another application for you all to see when it does come to that time. So we will be making adjustments. And so this is a space as well for you all to go really far back in your memory and try and remember when you were reviewing the applications, if there were things that you really, really valued that really shared the applicant stories well, and then spaces where you thought we were asking too much or not asking enough. So with that, those are kind of our three main areas we've been focusing on. And again, this is continuous improvement. So we've done this after the first cycle as well, except for the conversation about the scoring rubric. So I'm going to pass it over to Taylor, actually, while I fight through this, whatever pollen it is, and see how we want to go forward with this conversation.
Yeah, well, I imagine, and this is Doug's item, so I don't want to steal your thunder, Doug, but I think probably now is a good time to turn it over for questions. I know at least Amanda had one, and see if there are areas that the commission wants to dive in deeper, because like Robin mentioned, I mean, what we're looking for here is we want to, as staff, understand what the commission is interested in seeing us address and tweak for any potential future cycle. I mean, the biggest potential change would be adopting some kind of scoring rubric, which would weight the evaluation criteria. So I think that at least warrants some thoughts here from the commission. But yeah, also on anything else on the technical review that you would find helpful and tweaks to the application. Just wanted to have this time to reflect and get your brains on it, because if and when funding comes to the program, and it's often a pretty quick turnaround and we're in go mode. So this is our time to be in reflective mode. But with that, I'll turn it to Doug and you can facilitate the discussion, Doug.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. I don't have everybody on my screen because I'm using an iPad, so I'm going to have to rely on Taylor to help me call on people. I do want to make a quick comment myself, and that is, our landscapes in Oregon are very different, from the Willamette Valley to Southern Oregon, to the high desert of Eastern Oregon, to the timberlands of Northeast Oregon, to tidal lands on the coast. And somehow, as a commission, we have to compare those different lands and decide which ones we're going to fund. So it is a very steep challenge, and all of us, well, most of us, there's a few new ones that haven't been involved yet, but you will be. And so, Amanda, I'm going to let you go first because you're the only one I can see. And then after that, Taylor, if you can call on the rest of them, that'd be great.
Sure thing.
The benefit of an A name, isn't it?
Unfair advantage.
I do agree with Doug about the nuance of trying to evaluate these applications across the geographic variability of the state and different community needs. So I don't know that I have anything helpful to offer about the rubric question yet, because I can see both sides of that argument. But what I did want to bring up, and I have been a squeaky wheel about it in the past, so I'm just going to continue to squeak, especially given the questions that Dan brought up about it in the CMP review, is I think that the technical review team would benefit from having an expert on socially disadvantaged communities or communities disproportionately impacted on climate change, or even just a community expert, because even outside of those additional climate change criteria that we just adopted in the last rulemaking revisions, there were still, points in the application that were ranked on how does this involve the local community, not just tribes, but other communities disproportionately impacted by climate change, and what are the overall benefits to the community going to be, not just to this one farm or ranch operation. So unfortunately, to ask you guys to do even more work on those technical review teams that I know are based on volunteers, but I think that would be nice to see. And then it would help in these application reviews that the commission conducts, that we can see, oh yes, there's that assessment or that explanation of why they're saying it impacts this community or not.
Yeah, thank you for that, Amanda. That's super helpful. And if anything, I think that will help us broaden our pool of potential recruits. So that's a good thing. Okay, I see Jan and then Mark.
Yes, I think that the rubric could be very helpful. I'm on the Water Resources Commission, and we've developed a rubric that we have for our technical support team to be able to look at projects, and those projects are all around the state, so they've been able to adapt that to make it workable. So I think that could be key in helping us with our decisions, and also key for them. And our commission doesn't always select the project with the highest number. So there is some flexibility to make other considerations. But one thing that I didn't see in the rubric example that I thought might be important would be to have some valuation of carbon sequestration, since the OAHP program looks at that. So those are my comments.
Thank you for that, Jan. Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I apologize for not having my camera working. I'll get it working again. I like to see your faces, so sorry you can't see mine. Uh, Going back to what we were just talking about, Robin, you were talking about the Appendix B, the list of folks, volunteers that serve on the Technical Review Committee. Now, just for clarification for me, is that a standing committee? Are those volunteers citizens at large, government entities, employees of the states and agencies and federal agencies? Tell me how that works. Does it rotate through, or how is that chosen?
Yeah, great question. So in OHP, it just says a technical committee with expertise appropriate to the program. And so we don't have a current standing committee. We've had repeat members, which has been valuable, but it's not a fully standing committee. And mostly we look for agency representation, research institutions, primarily to avoid the kind of advocacy realm. In our technical committee membership. And then a lot of it has to do as well with going out and being proactive and finding those that have the expertise that are most applicable to the projects that are coming in the door. So it does vary. And we do try to make sure that we have folks that can represent the projects and look at the projects specifically.
Yeah, just to add on that, Mark, this is an important part of the TRT recruitment process. So we try and get a sense from the commission and work internally as staff to understand what are the buckets of expertise that we want on the review team. And then, the work is then going out and recruiting folks so that we don't have big gaps in expertise. So that's what we're trying to solicit today, is to make sure that we have a good understanding of what we need those buckets to be.
Thanks. And are the agencies, when you solicit them for representation, are they fairly supportive in providing somebody to be on this committee? Like Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, somebody from fisheries, would they give somebody that? Would they give someone for wildlife habitat to review? Or are you having resistance, or is it a big time commitment for them? Do they commit to a couple years? Is just they commit to nothing?
They commit to at least 1 year, and I've always been impressed and surprised at how willing folks are to serve on these teams. It is a big time commitment. You've read all the applications, or maybe not you, Mark, because you're somewhat new, but most folks here, it's a lot to get through, and it's a heavy lift, and we ask them to be experts in those applications. But that being said, I think, like Robin mentioned, there's something like 33 of these technical review teams. Each of them have 10 or so folks on the review team. So we're looking to fill 300 or so slots, and there's just really not that many experts out there who are also not applicants, right? And not and that serve in a role that can support them in being part of these review teams. So it is a challenge to fill the slots. And I think as OWEB takes on more and more grant programs, as we have done in the past few years, it's become harder. But that's why it's really important for us as staff to be really clear about what we're looking for in reviewers, so that we're not just putting bodies in chairs, but that we're strategically getting the right folks in the room to have the conversation we need to have in order to rank these projects.
And just
Sure.
briefly, Mark, I would add on that, and Robin mentioned this, I would say that just across OWEB's review processes, our state and tribal partners have really tried to step in to address some of those federal agency representation challenges we're seeing with technical expertise, just because folks are stretched or maybe no longer in their positions. But that is front of mind for us at the agency. Our federal partners have been critical, including partners like NRCS, just as one example, in the OHP program. So trying to be mindful of not asking too much of, university, tribal, state partners, given just some of the federal uncertainty that we've seen is important.
Yeah, I understand that. So, okay, I appreciate it. I'm learning things slowly here, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Ed, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say first that I appreciate the staff, Taylor and Robin, digging into this topic and trying to make the program better, right? And doing all the background work, comparing other programs to, see if there is a better way of doing business. So I do appreciate that. I know that this topic has been something that's been brought up by applicants and in conversations in the past, and it's extremely challenging, as Doug elaborated. Trying to compare these projects across the state. I do think, and what I have heard from applicants is that it has been challenging sometimes for them to internally vet projects and try to compare which ones are gonna make the cut, right, and what they're gonna spend time in preparing an application that's going to be successful. And I know that we have, I think, pretty solid evaluation criteria, right? We went through that whole process and um, the statute of our program here and trying and making sure that that's clear and what we're looking at. But I also do appreciate in that example that that the staff provided in the package of how each evaluation criteria could be considered in the review, and to just be sure that the applicants know that the degree to which they're discussing how the project relates to the criteria, that they make sure they're not missing including that in their application, because that could really make or break, right, the project. And I think that maybe if it's not accepted as a formal rubric, maybe just as a guide, perhaps, to the applicants to make sure that they are clear in what the reviewers are going to be looking at. And I know we're still building this program. We're still from year to year looking at kind of providing an example of what we're prioritizing with our funding. But I think as we have funded projects, we can maybe express to the applicants what aspects we are looking at when we're making those funding decisions. So I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you, Ed. Laura.
Hey, I just want to echo, I think, what Ed said. My having been in the room for many of these conversations about the point range or not to do the point range or not to do attach points, I understand the pluses and minuses. My concern, or the reason I would lean towards a point range, would be if staff, if the commission, if the technical committee really are weighing one criteria more than another, like if that's happening, we need to convey that to the applicants and not convey to them that all things are equal and then but actually what we did in our evaluation is something different. So I'm not saying that's happening, but with so many criteria, just seems like it might be happening. If it is happening, how do we convey that to the applicants so they aren't surprised? They are, if we're telling them all things are equal, we have to make sure that we are weighing all things equal. And if all those criteria aren't, then we need to convey that. So I think that's what I was hoping to hear from you guys about and talk a little bit more about maybe with the other commissioners in this conversation.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, we'll dive into that deeper, Laura, as we go. But I'm gonna get to Dan first. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Just kind of following up on what Laura just said. Like in a lot of ways, this is kind of similar to what the CRP does and how the CRP is evaluated, right? Where they have a points-based system, but the difference is that the FSA has a staff of thousands of people who work on this stuff all the time. So I think it puts a lot of pressure on OWEB to make sure that each of these things are going to be represented to some degree on each review committee, which I don't know how feasible that is, right? I don't know how reasonable it is to expect that we would have all of these different things represented on each committee. But the other thing is, I guess just going back to the thing that came up earlier about the information you're allowed to rely on for the reviewers, are they only explicitly allowed to look at the application and whatever conversations happen at the site visit, or are they allowed to draw on whatever sources they might have in their own expertise, right? Like, I'm just thinking of like a soil scientist might be able to look at a map and say something about the soil, soil health that wouldn't necessarily show up in the visit or, in the application itself. And similarly, like for things like fragmentation, like a lot of that is going to be affected by how far away they are from the nearest urban growth boundary, how the land is zoned, how the neighboring land is zoned, which is all kind of readily available. But if it's not explicitly mentioned in the application, like to what extent can they kind of draw on other sources?
Yeah, well, the answer is going to be a little bit unsatisfying, at least the one I'm going to give, and maybe Renee can jump in here to speak to OWEB more generally. But we as staff, we're trying to facilitate these reviews by keeping the conversation focused around the questions we ask in the application that are based in the evaluation criteria. That being said, again, the same point I made about the commission is the same for the technical review team. The reason we have those folks in the room is because of the expertise they're bringing to the table. So your example of somebody with expertise in soil science, there's a question in the application about soils, and they're going to weigh in on the strength of the answer. What we ask them not to do is to start sort of expanding their interpretation of what the criteria says and rooting their comments outside of the evaluation criteria and the application. It's a conversation amongst human beings, so it does go in different places, but there's no hard and fast rules, but we do really try and root the conversation in the evaluation criteria and the application. Ultimately, how a reviewer ends up voting on ranking, it's hard to get into their mind to understand exactly what influenced their ultimate vote. But as far as the comments that gets translated into the staff evaluation rooted in that technical review team conversation, we're always kind of trying to make sure folks understand sort of the sideboards. And those sideboards are, is your comment related to an evaluation criteria? And how does it tie to what they were talking about in the application? So we invite folks to bring in their expertise, but we always want to tie it back to what's been presented as far as what the project's proposing to do and what the commission adopted as, you know, our evaluation criteria. So it's a little bit of a squishy process, and adding a, you know, a scoring rubric would make it somewhat less squishy, but it's always going to be a little bit.
I wonder if there's some room for having kind of, I could see it working for some rubric items, but not others, but like some specific information that needs to be provided about each property to provide more of an apples to apples comparison. Like going back to what Amanda was saying about, you know, the climate vulnerable communities, like, are you located in one of these, right? And then it's just a box you can check or you don't check. And if you check it, you know, you get that point or not. So I don't know, maybe that could streamline it a little bit just to make sure the information is consistent across the applications.
Mm-hmm. Renee, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I do think that that is one approach that can be taken where it's a binary. You check the box and the assumption is you've covered it, or you don't check the box and the assumption is you don't. I think that one that can present some challenges if it's just simply a tally. And we talked about that. Like that is one of the maybe drawbacks. I'm not going to say it's a con, but just a drawback of a scoring system is you don't have a lot of nuance in that case. And I have Bruce Taylor kind of ringing in my head saying, these applications are the opportunity for applicants to tell their story. Like, why is this compelling? Why this project? Why here? As compared to the evaluation criteria. So there's no perfect answer. There's no silver bullet on any of this because I think all of these approaches have some trade-offs. I think just going back, Dan, to the comment though about kind of introducing new information, we, you know, if you look at that set of expertise that we convened around the evaluation criteria and, you know, land use as an example, we expect the person who's representing that area of expertise to come in and be able to rattle off some of the things that you described about zoning, you know, risk given infringement of urban growth boundaries, things like that. What we really work hard across our technical teams to do is have someone who says, well, I happen to know about this project, and they're introducing new information when it's filling a gap that an applicant should have taken the opportunity to fill in their application. And that's really the work that we try to do, to not introduce new information from a parity standpoint. Because if you happen to have somebody who knows about a project here, but not this one over here, then that can really be. And the same with site visits. If you have poor attendance at a site visit here and great attendance over here, that can inadvertently skew the situation. So that's more of the trying to not introduce new information to fill gaps that applicants maybe should have filled on their own based on the application questions that were asked. So hopefully that helps, and totally hear you though on the scoring could help get at, you know, some of those things that are more, it's a yes or no than what a narrative question could.
Yeah, and I, just to be clear, I wouldn't advocate for, you know, going all the way in, you know, in that direction, just for maybe a couple of the items, like, and that, you know, there could still be room for explanation, but just to have a little bit more consistency. But yeah, I totally hear what you're saying.
Laura, go for it.
All right, since Renee just used the example of land use, and since I think, Taylor, you were sort of asking if we had opinions about the technical review committee, I will say that I'm a little concerned, and I just wanted to ask you all the question. I want to make sure that we have ag land use, technical expertise, and I'm a little worried that's going to be more challenging than it was before because the position at ODA wasn't filled. So Is that something that's on your radar? And do you have some ideas about other places to look for that expertise? Can we make sure that stays on the technical review committee? Seems really important.
Well, Taylor has kind of a sad look on his face, or I don't know if you can see him or not. So yes, it is on our radar. And yes, we don't have a perfect answer yet, because that's a critical part of evaluating applications coming into these programs for OAHP. And I would say that certainly historically the ODA position has been a go-to. That is, a challenge with transition, and then knowing if the seat isn't filled and we're facing some of the challenges that we touched on earlier in terms of federal partner uncertainty, we have to lean in on that. And I don't have an answer for you at this point.
Okay. Well, I think what you are saying though is you're confirming that it's important and you're trying to figure it out. So that's what I was hoping to hear.
Great. Sarah, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Laura said earlier, that if there is weighing that's happening in the scoring, then being transparent in that, whether we're using the matrix or not, I think is super important for the program and for applicants. But I also think that the qualitativeness of some of these kinds of evaluations are really huge. And so what I'm not clear about is if the technical review team, like when they're going through the scoring criteria, do they all weigh in on everything, or this is the conversation that happens when some technical expert would come up and bring a louder voice to the table in what their expertise is, I'm assuming, right? Yeah. Okay. So if we did move to some kind of rubric, what I would not want to lose is that nuance of that kind of expertise. Like I wouldn't want every expert on the technical review team to be answering all of these questions in the rubric, because they're not going to be experts in all of this, and it will water down the scoring weighting, I would say.
Hey, anybody else? Robin, you feel like we got what we needed out of this conversation? Do you have questions for the commission?
Yeah, I think to Sarah's last point, I think that's what our technical committee struggles with, is that they don't know whether they should be weighting something when they do their ultimate rank. Despite the many attempts to remind folks that it is you're looking at the project as a whole, and your ranking is to take into consideration every evaluation criteria equally. That's hard to do. And we all struggle with it. And so we don't know either necessarily, given the discussion, because the discussion itself tends to does touch on all the evaluation criteria, and whether that's one or two people weighing in more on certain items and then others more on the other. The ultimate ranking is everybody providing their input in a rank. And so I think to be able to convey that, that's not going to come from staff, and that's not going to come from our technical committee. So that puts that back onto you all. And, Renee and Taylor, you can stop me if you'd like, but that does put it back onto you all to express what this program should be looking at in terms of putting toward our applicants as to how we'll be weighing, or how it will be weighing certain criteria. So we're not asking for you to make that decision right now, but if that is a direction and a value that the commission thinks is important, then it's work we need to do if we're going to take that route in another cycle, because we need to be able to message that as early as possible to potential applicants, so we're not having people throw together applications that ultimately they think are going to be really great, and then turns out the scoring or the weighting gets a little bit different. So that is a big question to folks, given the, and I think one of the things we tried to demonstrate with the example was that we have some criteria that is just a single question, and then we have others that have 4 sub questions. And so how do we equally decide to put to a description on what is being looked for on those? And so there is some space for you all to have to kind of think through what you think the program should be asking of applicants and doing with the evaluation criteria as well. And so I think it's important for you all to know that staff is not weighting criteria on our own when we're doing the evaluations. We're taking the conversations that are happening and the ultimate rank that ends up from the committee and trying to bring that to you all in a way that is accurate.
Yes, agree with
prompted
Rob.
questions, Mark. And then Ed.
Yeah, thank you. And being new, I'm new here. I don't know the history and what you guys have done in the past with this, but 20, 30 years ago, these various programs like this have always struggled with how to do this. So, with our agency that I work with Oregon Fish and Wildlife, we have the Restoration Enhancement Board and the Access and Habitat, and it's the exact same thing. Do you do a scoring matrix? How do you weight these? So what you're wrestling with here is new. Have you looked into other agencies and programs when this was developed, and did you build off of another program, another agency, or did you guys start from ground zero and how you had to do this? I'm just throwing that out as maybe you've done all this already, and
I think we can go to our historian, Doug, to tell us about the considerations that happened at the development of the program. But I think we can also give some context internally on the work OWEB did to support the early development of the program, if you'd prefer, Doug.
And to answer a little bit of my history, most of you know I've been on this program since day one. I even worked on the legislative end of it when we first got it through the legislature. I have continually advocated that we need flexibility because every piece of property is important unto itself. But, how does all this stuff fit together? And for an example, I've had a farm up in Clatskanie, Oregon, and, there was a neighboring landowner that got approved for a conservation easement. And that piece of property was in competition with a piece of property down there in John O'Keefe's area, down there in Lakeview. Well, I've never even been to Lakeview, and here in my mind, I'm trying to judge this piece of property that's right next door to me. And I know exactly how the soils are and how everything works, but I have no clue how those work, how everything relates down in Lakeview. And so, we really do have to rely on our technical committees, but we gotta keep flexibility to fund pieces of property that we think are really important. And that's going to vary from commissioner to commissioner, and we're all going to have a little different take on all that. But that's why we're here. We're here to represent our area of expertise. And so I don't think we want to hand it all over to staff, but at the same time, we need staff and technical committees to tell us how one piece compares to another from their perspectives. And I don't know, long way of saying, boy, I don't know what you're going to do.
Thanks, Doug. Mark, go for it.
Well, my hand was still up from last time, but I'll just continue to what I've asked earlier. It's we struggle with various programs around the state on how to score things and how to be fair. And obviously, this program is going through that also, and I don't think you're ever going to get away from it. It's just the way it's going to be. And if there's ways to improve it, then you improve it. You're going to have to get a black eye every now and then with why was this scored this way and why was this scored that way. The point I was making at earlier with comparing it to other work that was done, I just asked is in the development process when we were developing this way of ranking, did you look at other agencies and other programs and piggyback off of any, or did you guys come up with this from ground zero, from scratch? And I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm just saying there might be an approach out there that appeals to the technical review committee or this commission if you could find one. I don't know, other than trying to create a whole new one here or struggle over this one. That's all I was asking.
Yeah, really briefly, Mark. So I do think that we leaned heavily on OWEB's standard approach, which is essentially a qualitative process that makes sure that multiple evaluation criteria are addressed in the review, but not going the scoring route. And for all of our other programs, we have a lot fewer evaluation criteria than we do for either of the OAHP, the conservation easements or CMPs. I do think that is part of the calling of the question here is that has been a challenge at times, as Ed was describing. Folks aren't sure what to aim for because they're not sure if a project is actually going to make the cut, given that they're trying to balance 27 evaluation criteria that are equally weighted. So I do think if there can be some kind of roadmap or rules of the road that could be helpful, whether that's a scoring rubric, we could give it a try. We just typically do not do that at OWEB. We're happy to demonstrate it here. It may come with some drawbacks here and there, but we're happy to test drive things to see if we can get a little bit closer to certainty if there is kind of subjective weighting happening here and there, like say describing what Doug did about having that flexibility, but trying to give the folks coming in the door some better sense of what the fit could be for a program. We're open to trying that, or some space in between of rubric where it makes sense, but so with some space for flexibility. I don't know exactly what that looks like, and Robin's probably wanting me to stop talking with a comment like that, but if it would be helpful for all of us, applicants, reviewers, and you all, we're happy to try some other ways of doing it. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a little bit new at this, and I don't think I really have a lot to add, but listening, what comes to mind is when I was young, grant money went to people that had time to sit around and fill out grants, and projects that really needed done didn't get done till an advocate came along and did it. And that has improved immensely, and we've gone a long ways. And I don't know how to feel about defining the criteria tighter. Some of the best work we do comes under the category of art. And obviously, if we make it all science, we don't leave room for the art, but there's a lot of benefit to the science. It makes our decisions defendable, and it makes people feel treated fair at the end of the day. So I do recognize that there's a lot of challenges here, but as Doug said, we need to leave some flexibility in there. And the thing Mark said earlier, the scalability, especially these planning projects, if you're going to be impactful, there were some great projects on some small acreages, but if you're going to be impactful, you've got to start approaching a landscape scale, and that makes you feel like maybe the smaller applicants aren't being treated fair, but it's part of the equation. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, well, Taylor, how have we done?
Been very useful. Thank you.
Okay.
And yeah, if there's nothing else, we do have one more agenda item.
Yep.
Okay.
Sarah, you're up.
All right, we're moving to agenda item E, which is other business. And I think that, is it Renee? Renee, do you have something else?
I think it's Robin shepherding this one. Yep.
Yep. Okay, so other business here is extension requests on two of our active OAHP conservation easement grants, both from the fiscal year 2023 funding awards cycle. I will go through them both individually because they're two different grants, and then turn it over to y'all for discussion. So first, Sealy Farm Phase 1 was awarded to Oregon Agricultural Trust to purchase a working lands conservation easement on about 385 acres of high-value farmland in Columbia County. OAT has requested an extension on its closing deadline for this, anticipating some additional time will be needed to coordinate and accommodate OWEB and NRCS approval timelines, and have completed or initiated a number of their required due diligence items. That includes resolving some pretty lofty title matters, and then the initiation of survey work to develop their easement boundary, negotiation of the easement deed, initiated preparation of the baseline documentation, and have completed an appraisal for the conservation easement deed. So they have asked that their grant timeline be extended to October 31st of 2025. The other extension request is Wall Ranch, and this one is an extension for their FY23 grant. As most of you are aware, they also have a grant through our 25 cycle, which was to kind of add additional funds to get them over the finish line for the same project in the 23 grant. So they are already operating on two very different timelines. The 23 grant, they have requested an extension through September, and essentially, this project has completed all of its due diligence items. It's just waiting in the queue for NRCS to go through their internal controls process, which they are currently in. So this is I'd say, preemptive attempt by the applicant to make sure that they have the space to get through those NRCS and internal controls and any final steps they need on that. They have entered what we call prepayment with NRCS, and so it's kind of right on the cusp of completing. And so for both grants, we are making the same recommendation, essentially aligning timelines on those. So staff is recommending that the commission recommend to the OWEB board, because as you all recall, you make the recommendation, and then the OWEB board will ultimately make the final decision at their July board meeting. But staff is recommending that the commission recommend to the OWEB board extend the grant deadline to October 31st, 2025 for both the Sealy Farm Phase 1 and to October 31st, 2025 for the Wall Ranch project from 2023. Happy to answer questions.
Anybody got any questions? Thank you, Robin.
I'll make a motion that we approve the staff report, extending those deadlines for both the Sealy Farm Phase 1 and the Wall Ranch to October 31st, 2025.
Thank you, Doug.
Mike, second.
Great. Who seconded? Was that Mark?
Mark Vargas.
Thanks, Mark. Any discussion? All right. Hearing none. This is not roll call, is it, Taylor? This is regular.
This can
Okay. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion passed. Doug, how about I turn it back over to you? Are there any other? Anything else? No.
I think we're close to the end. Taylor, do you have anything more before I adjourn the meeting?
I don't. So it would be up to you all to throw a curveball, but
Okay,
not
I'll
encouraging.
ask for any other business, but I'm going once, going twice. We are adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. See you next time.
All right, bye-bye.